Welcome back to yet another episode of the Commander Experience podcast. I am your host, Brian.
And I'm Jacob. Today we're going to talk about the next color, and up next here is green. So it's going to be interesting.
Let's break it down. Yes, talking about the fifth and final color in the Color Pie series. I'm imagining this gonna be another blue episode, meaning that we have a lot to talk about. Green is a big one. But what is one of the first things that come to mind when we are talking about green, Jacob?
I think the first one is abusing lanes in some way. So if we're going to be very specific, you can quickly mention landfall, which is one of the big ones. I think this is kind of interesting because it's not usually how you abuse lands in Bracket 4. It's more of a Bracket 3 thing, but it's still something they're good at. So I think it's important to mention.
It is. I also think green, well, at least when I'm thinking about green, it's one of the jack of all trades sort of color.
Yeah.
Kind of does everything, can provide anything, is in that way both a great support color and a great main color. Whatever your deck strategy might be, I think green can provide it. And I do think that is one of its biggest strengths.
Something they're better at than in the other colors, probably. In lower bracket, you will probably call it Stompy. But we do see that some of that in our bracket that is used in other ways, but basically big creatures. And in bracket 4, they can be abused by abusing they have big power and for some other reason, card draw. So I think that strategy is still a thing in bracket 4, it's just used in another way.
It is. I think most people will testify to having lost the most game to Greater Hoof Behemoth.
Yeah.
And that somehow has also been very translatable to Bracket 4, because in Bracket 4 you have a lot of cheap creatures, mana dogs and whatever you have, but that still does activate the Greater Hoof.
Yeah.
So we still see that even in Bracket 4. That is still very much a thing. And I could imagine that is a creature that you also still see winning games in both Bracket 2 and 3. Maybe not Bracket 2, but at least in Bracket 3. And of course, also talking about green, you can't help but think about mana dogs. Llanowar Elves is not only one of the big stable of green, but one of the biggest stable of Magic altogether, I think. If you have Soul Ring being the poster child for Commander, I think that Llanowar Elf in some way is the poster child for Magic the Gathering in general.
Yeah, and when we talk about some of the ramp here, it's kind of interesting, I think, that in Bracket 4 you will probably mention a lot more lane ramp, and there is some of that in Bracket 4, but I think especially the mana dogs is the big one in Bracket 4, and the lane ramp is a bit more specific when we turn up the power level. That's one of the big difference, I think.
Yeah, I also think it's one of the biggest changes that has happened to our part during the last year. I think if we go just 1 year back, we didn't see as many mana dogs as we are now. We have shifted the play over to being much faster. So casting a turn 1 mana dog is so much better now than casting a turn 2 3 wizards or something like that.
Yeah, and just to quickly mention, I think this is also like a byproduct of mana crypt being banned. So how do we perform kind of what that did? And that can be kind of imitated with a mana dog into a rug.
Yeah,
it's interesting. I think that has something to do with it.
Yeah, I think you're right about that. Of course, talking about green, and when you say that it kind of does everything, it doesn't really do everything. So what are some of the things you think where green lacks a bit?
Yeah, I think that like the two biggest one, which is kind of the same vein, is creature removal, and same vein as that, board wipes. And board wipes, we kind of have showed that what we think about that, and that's maybe not too important. So if we push that aside for Bracket 4, I think creature removal is still pretty important in our pot. So standing alone on green is pretty rough for spot removal. There is some, but it's definitely not one of the best things in green.
And I also think, talking about creature removal and board wipes, that is also one of its big downsides, meaning that they are very vulnerable in what they're doing in general, because most green strategies are creature related.
Yeah.
And by that sense, you're very vulnerable to being board wiped. And that can really hurt playing green, and you don't have a lot of protection. You, of course, have some, but green are also not providing a lot of board-wide protection. Not as much as in other colors, and not as good as in other colors. And I think that's one of the big downsides, also because that when we're talking green, they tend to have, at least in my opinion, more setup, meaning that if you're running a landfall deck, you have to have some creatures on board that gets a triggered ability, something like that, when you're playing those lands. Even when playing cards like Scape Shift or those sort of cards, you need to have some sort of setup before you can get the payoff. And I do think that green are a little bit slower to get that ball rolling when you compare it to some of the other colors.
Yeah, definitely. I think green interesting. Like I feel like the curve is low and then it just spikes at the end. So it feels like the start is a bit slower, but suddenly the combination of 1, 2, 3 cards just so much value that's hard to compete with. So
Yeah.
if a green deck gets to just sit there and do the thing, it will probably take over the game. But yeah, the early game is a bit slower.
We're going to talk a lot about green, what it's providing in general for bracket 4 is the Guy's Cradle meta.
Yeah.
But before we go into that, where do you think green would be if it wasn't for Guy's Cradle? Do you think it would even be playable? Because I kind of think that Guy's Cradle is green's sort of everything. Of course, they have all. I still think you would run all the dogs and all that. Of course, you wouldn't not stop play green altogether. But I do kind of think that what it's providing right now for bracket 4 and bracket 5.
I think at least that Guy's Cradle is like the push that makes this from a support color, the best support color ever, to basically just being a main color. Because without Guy's Cradle, it lacks like a plan, if you can say that. It has all the pieces to do something great, but it kind of need other colors to end up winning with all those pieces. But just Guy's Cradle alone is just so much value on top, and they keep printing more and more copies of Guy's Cradle that are a bit worse, but as long as you have outlet commanders like Thrasios, it's just going to be so strong.
And I also think it's one of the things that green are really well known for, providing these big spikes of mana using the utility they have available. But we just talked about red the last time and all the rituals they're providing. And I do think that especially in bracket 4, that's kind of better for the tempo we're playing at, because they're providing the mana as soon as turn 1, 2, and 3, where green usually have to use, like I said, they have more setup to provide those sort of big spikes. If we were not talking Guy's Cradle, but even then, you need to have creatures in play in order to have those spikes.
But yeah, green have some of those cards that just push them over the top. I can like, on top of my head, I have like 5, 6 cards in my head where like these 6 cards is just so much above everything else that it just makes the color on their own. And Guy's Cradle is on that list, so.
Yeah, we already covered this, but talking about green, we think that it can both be a main color or a supporting color. That really depends on what your game plan is and what you want to do, but it can definitely provide both strategies.
Yeah.
So moving on to some of the green stables that we see at our table and in bracket 4 in general. You want to start us out, Jacob?
Yeah, we can start out with some of the mana dogs we mentioned. I feel like there is 2 versions of the mana dogs. There is the 1 mana ones, and just to mention one of the best ones, the Lighted Halfling or Birds of Paradise. Like that's one of the like categories of mana dogs that is very early on. You get it down, you get the mana very early, and it helps you push out other mana pieces. And like in the same vein, the other mana dog we see is called the Bloom Tender category. Bloom Tender is the best one by far, but basically a bit more pricey on the mana cost, but they can help you with that mana spike we talked about before. There's also loads of those. Bloom Tender is just the best one by far. So mana dogs are strong, and in the right decks, just stables straight up.
Yeah, I think alongside Bloom Tender, you can mention Selvala, Heart of the Wilds is sort of doing the same.
Yeah, definitely.
A little bit slower maybe, but sort of the same.
Yeah.
I also think that you could add in Elvish Spirit Guide into that category.
Yeah.
It's not tapping, no, but it's one of those cards that could maybe even get 2 mana dogs out turn 1. It gives you access to 2 mana turn 1, which is pretty powerful.
Yeah, I think it is especially strong in green, as you said. It can lead to 2 mana dogs on turn 1, which is so strong because, them not having haste, you want them early, and this can help you basically have 4 mana on turn 2. That can be a pretty insane spike. So I think Elvish Spirit Guide, just as the red one, is just so strong and can help you cast your commander earlier. I think
Yeah.
something that some people overlook when we talk about green, I know we did for some time in our pod, is Wild Growth and Utopia Sprawl.
Yeah.
I think, for me at least, they are probably uncontested the best ramp in green. It's so powerful because it's on a land, and we see more and more untapping lands, so they can also be abused on top of them not being that easy to remove. I think those are very strong.
Yeah, and a card we're going to talk about in a little bit is Badger Mold Cop. And playing Badger Mold Cop and earthbending one of these lands. Also,
Yeah.
it's in many times it's easier to untap a creature to tap it again. So I think Wild Growth and Utopia Sprawl is very overlooked in some cases. Also because, of course, you want to get your mana dogs down turn 1. But let's say you're top decking a Wild Growth on turn 2. Now you have 2 lands. So now your mana dog sort of have haste because you're using one of the lands to play Wild Growth, and now you can tap for 2. That is one of the upsides that the Wild Growth has that the mana dogs don't. So it is running into some other downsides, but I think overall you rather want to play the Wild Growth than Utopia Sprawls. But also, like we talked about, this being a guy's cradle mate, this is one of the downside playing these kind of ramp effects. Then, of course, talking about landfall, we have the Lotus Cobra Tireless Provisioner effects, where you get mana for playing your lands. There's also the Nissa that does sort of the same thing, and in some cases, even better, because another card we're going to talk about in a bit is Aftermath Analyst. And that being an elf, and also Tireless Provisioner is actually an elf, so triggering Nissa will help you find some of those cards. So a very overlooked card, I think. I do think that people, when I say people, I think Magic players, but I do think some Magic players tend to forget about Nissa and how powerful she actually is, and maybe that also is due to her price tag, because she is kind of expensive when you compare it to the 2 others. So maybe that's the reason.
Yeah, I think these are like the uncontested best lanefall cards. Most of the other ones are a lot more casual. So these are definitely the one to look into. And up next, we have some more like out of category. So we have some different ones here. We have Exploration, which in the right deck is pretty good. Just more lands. If you get that on turn 1, it's pretty strong. And if your deck can abuse it later, it's just even better. Next up is one of the ones that you probably don't see too much when you go down Breakage for Breakage 4. It's Carpet of Flowers. I think we have learned how powerful this card is in our meta. It's pretty insane. Most of the time it's 1 mana, make 3 mana on the same turn. Okay, crazy. So that just feels like a ritual. Crop Rotation is one of the ones I'm going to mention quick. Especially now we talked about Guy's Crate early on here, so it can find that and other utility lands, and it being 1 mana and you can find a land on tap, so it's basically free. You can just find your best land. Putting it into the ramp section is maybe wrong, but most of the time, currently it will actually ramp you because it finds Sky's Cradle or something like that.
Yeah, I've actually even used it in a deck where I have it for finding Guy's Cradle, but I've actually used a Crop Rotation turn 1 to find a Ancient Tomb, because I could then cast my One Ring turn 2. And there are these sort of examples where you can just use it for something else, but most of the time it will actually ramp you because you're usually finding the lands that taps for more than 1 mana. And it being instant speed, it doesn't even have to, because you can just cast it on an in turn, and now it did its thing. So I mean the flaw is that it's color fixing you at the very least.
And it has so much utility. It also has the hidden mode, so to say, that if you play blue, you can have a green mana open, then you can cast Crop Rotation, make it into a blue mana and counter something, and people don't expect it. So it's so good in so many ways. So
yeah, and with the addition of, I can't remember what it's called, I'm gonna put it on screen, but the land that faces out a creature, now you can even use it for interaction, because now you can find that land and put it into play and face out one of your opponent's commanders as he's trying to win. You might even use it on your own turn to face out a Draneth Magistrate or something like that, because now you can try and go for the win. So yeah, Crop Rotation is just one of those Swiss Army knives that can do so much more than just finding a land.
Yeah, definitely. This is like a true staple, just every deck is probably worth it.
Yeah.
Next up, we have a reserve list card, so it's Earthcraft. We have seen some of this in our pod. It's a bit interesting because if you are heavy green and you rely on all these mana dogs, the cards actually get a bit worse. So it's not ultra generic, but I think it's still generic enough that we have talked about is it even good enough just if you have 5 creatures in your deck and your commander? Maybe it's still good enough for that just because your commander will always tap for mana. So if you have a cheap commander, it's kind of a mana rock for 2 mana.
It is a mana rock for 2 mana, in my opinion, especially if you run a 2 or 3 CMC commander. Of course, that commander needs to be a commander that doesn't gain anything from tapping.
Yeah.
But you have your Sithis deck, as an example, where not only are you drawing a card for casting this, but now Sithis is also tapping for a mana. I don't think you need to reach the ceiling with Earthcraft in order for it to be good. Like you said, just running 10, 15 creatures in your deck, it doesn't really have to be that creature heavy. I think Earthcraft ends up paying for itself. I think it's very much stable.
Then we have a new kid on the block, so to say, Vegetable Cup. Yeah, I don't know what to say. This card is just insane.
Yeah, we actually made a whole episode about this card, so we won't go into depth with Badgermole Cup. Go watch our Badgermole Cup episode if you're into that sort of thing. But yeah, of course, Badgermole Cup is an instant stable. We're just quickly gonna run over some of the tutors. Green is the color that is real good at finding creatures, and we have Worldly Tutor as one of the best, of course, 1 mana instant. And then we have all sorts of tutors in that category that pretty much does the same thing. You have your Green Sun Zenith and your Finale of Devastation that can even work as a win con in some cases. But this category is just swarmed with creature tutors. But I think one of the ones we just have to quickly mention, also because, as we said, this is a guy's cradle meta. We have the very new Formidable Speaker creature tutor that can also untap a permanent. And what I think is funny with this tutor is that if you look at some of the other tutors that does this, you have to discard a creature card.
Yeah.
But this is just any card. So now you can discard a land or whatever you want to discard that you have in abundance and go find what you want to find. I just think that not only is this a really good card because it can untap Gaia's Cradle, but the tutoring effect itself is one of the better ones.
Yeah, this card is crazy. When I read it, I was like, really? Is this really what we need? I feel like they print green tutors every other set. And okay, let's just power creep tutors. Okay, great. But yeah.
And power creep Gaia's Cradle because we needed that.
Yeah. Yeah, it's pretty insane. So I'm pretty sure we'll see loads of that card in our pod. So.
But not a lot to say about creature tutors. They're great for a reason because you're playing green and you want to be finding creatures.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Next up, we have a amalgamation of different value cards. So one we mentioned earlier was the Aftermath Analyst, and maybe some will look at this and say, is that actually a stable? I think it will be pretty good in most decks, and it can help you get there in a lot of decks, and especially when you tend to be green, you have a tendency to abuse lands, and this can, even if you don't use it for like returning loads of land, if someone destroys your Gaia's Cradle, you can get it back with this for pretty cheap, so I think it's one of the better ones.
I also think with the amount of fetch lands that we're running in bracket 4, I mean, paying 4 mana for this just to get 3 lands back, I think that's pretty great value. Also because you can do it instant speed, so you could do it on somebody's end turn.
Yeah.
So I do think it's a lot better than it reads. And of course, as some of you know that are watching this episode, Aftermath Analysts also go into various game-ending combos where you can infinitely sack your lands and bring them back. But I don't think you need to do that in order for this card to be just good.
No, that's just, yeah. That's also what makes it better because it has some of that. So on top of it being great value, it also can combo. So.
Into sort of the same category, we have Sylvan Library and Greater Good, 2 stables that are drawing your cards in very different situations, of course. Greater Good is also a combo piece that can win you the game and draw your entire deck in most situations. Sylvan Library, of course, the more generic one, and maybe the best and most effective, I would say, green card drawing spell, because you can get it out as early as turn 1, and the life it costs doesn't really matter, especially in bracket 4. And the faster the meta you're playing, the less it ends up mattering if you're paying 8 or 16 life, even maybe even 24 sometimes. Just drawing those extra cards, even if they're bad ones, getting them away from the top is just so much value. Yeah,
and I should just mention, since we play basically fetch lands of all kinds, with Silver Library, you can remove the bad cards from the top if you really don't want to pay the life. So you can also abuse this as well. But yeah, both good cards in different ways. But yeah. Next up, we have mostly a stable, depends on your own deck, of course, but it's Collector Oof. We see this a lot on our part. I'm probably one of the people playing it the most. I have a lot of decks currently that don't run a lot of artifacts on purpose because I play all the dogs instead, and then Collector Oof is just a slam dunk. And since they keep printing more and more creature tutors at this point, you can play like 15 plus. So if you want a Collector Oof in play, you can have a Collector Oof in play all the time, basically. So very powerful.
Yeah, I even think it's so powerful that even if you're running loads of artifacts, it's probably still good enough because in many games you won't be in front anyway, and you have this as a utility. And with all the creature tutors we talked about before, you will almost always be able to get this in play when you need it. And even let's say if you're on par with your other opponents, let's say you have 3 artifacts and all of your opponents have 3 artifacts, you can use your own artifacts for casting Collector Oath. Yeah. And now you're stopping 9 mana at the table. Yes, you're locking your own 3 out, but in most cases you don't mind that if you're taking away 9 mana from your opponents. Yeah. So I don't think you need to be greedy with Collector Oath in order for it to be good. And sort of the same reason that you're playing board wipes. You're playing board wipes not because you're not running any creatures yourself. You're running board wipes as a contingency. Yeah. And I think you can do that with Collector Oath yourself for those games where you're not in front and where it's not hurting you the most. It's one of those great escape mechanics or whatever you want to call it, where this game is really not going my way, and it sort of fills that same slot in green as Granite Magistrate does in white, I think.
Yeah, definitely. And also had this weird effect, at least for me when I play it, that it actually helps a lot with mulligans, which sounds a bit weird, but it has this effect of, this is a bit of a slow hand, but I have a worldly tutor, so I can just find Oof and play it on turn 2, and it will slow everyone else down. And then suddenly my hand is not that bad, and has that effect that it also helps a lot of hands being pretty good suddenly.
And we also talked a little bit about that stacks in general maybe not be a great fit in general, meaning that you're not always hurting the people you want to hurt, etc., etc. But what I love with Granite Magistrate and Oof is that it's creatures. And I do think that creatures to some extent makes them more playable because they're also sort of a lightning rod for your commander. So people not liking the Granite Magistrate and the Collector Oath will usually remove it when they can. So that's another removal spell out of your opponent's hands for when you're playing your commander turn 4 or whatever it is. And I really like them for those reasons.
Yeah, definitely.
An all-time green stable and a personal favorite of mine because I love my graveyard decks, and that is Hermit Druid. Yeah, this is best in class. I don't think you can find a better self-mill card. And not only is it self-milling you, it's also providing you with land in hand, making sure that you're not missing your land drop. So I think this is hands down just best in class. And this is actually one of the few cards where I think it's okay that Orcish Bowmaster got printed because Hermit Druid is just so ridiculous powerful. So
yeah, it's an insane card. Even in our meta where we actually don't see the whole tap Hermit Druid, you win the game. Even without that, it's still an insane card. So best self-mill card there is.
A couple of utility cards on the lists. We have Nature's Claim for all those Ristic studies out there. But of course, it also removes an occasional Smothering Tide or what have you. I think it's more than worth it running for just 1 mana. And then we have Noxious Revival that you can cast for 0 mana. 0 mana is always great in bracket 4. You don't want to be using any mana on spells when you can avoid it. And Noxious Revival is just one of those ways that you can get your Nature's Claim back if you need to.
Yeah, nothing feels better than getting a very important piece removed and then just put it back on top and draw it again and do it one more time. Great card.
Last but not least, Jacob, we have some of the biggest stables in green, I think. Some of those that either wins the game or are very close to winning the game.
So first up is probably the biggest one. It's Food Chain. So we all know it. Maybe not love it, but we all know it. It does what it does. It combos and win the game. If someone plays it and says it's just for value, they're probably lying. So don't believe that.
It's definitely going to be game-ending value.
Yeah, exactly. So, yeah, it is pretty good. We even talked about if it is good enough just for value and came to the conclusion that in the right deck it's probably good enough, even though you don't play all the obvious combos. So, insane card. And kind of in the same vein, it doesn't really do the same, but it also removes a creature and gives you some value, is Birthing Pod. This one can be game ending and it can also be a value engine. So pretty interesting card. I love this card, but what do you think about it?
The first thing I actually thought about it when you began talking about it was, this is another card that Formidable Speaker is just gonna love, because you're usually finding some of the creatures that can untap this.
Yeah.
And now you have Formidable Speaker that can also untap it. So, but I have actually never played that much Birthing Pod myself. It's not a theme or strategy that really speaks to me, but it's very efficient at what it does. I think it's the whole sorcery speed that kind of gets me, especially as we've moved into bracket 4.
Yeah. It doesn't feel that powerful anymore, but it's still a very good card because tutoring is just strong.
Yeah, it's also a thing. It has one of those hidden modes where your opponent can't really interact with it. So you can Birthing Pod, you collect Oath, and now you get like Dose in the Fallen Leaf or Grand Abolisher or something like that into play, and now people can respond with you playing the rest of your turn, and now you maybe even win the game. So
yeah, we have definitely seen games where someone Birthing Pods and then the creature come into play and like, can I? No, you can't. I have already revealed the creature and there's no way to respond now. Okay.
Yeah.
I guess you won the game, so.
I think that's one of the best cases in bracket 4, bringing out stacks pieces or something that can help you win the game here and now.
Exactly.
One of the cards that doesn't exactly win you the game, unless you're playing my Yoda deck, is Apex Devastator. The 4 times Cascade is just really devastating, pun intended. And I mean, the decks you play, I think you could just play it generically in all decks and you're good with it. But then there's all the decks where you're playing a higher curve, where this can just end games.
Yeah, we actually did multiple times also because it can be cheated into play. I'm not talking about reanimating, but lowering the cost and suddenly you pay a little mana and get all this value. And yeah, normally it's just backbreaking.
Playing this off the top with an Itali or something like that. Yeah. And I play Wooburg for it in Joda, of course, and now I'm flipping into extra turn spells and emergent ultimatums. Now it's just fun. Then we have the poster child for what we talked about earlier, and that is Crater Hoof Behemoth. I don't think we need to say what this creature does, so we will just quickly move on and talk about Team of Sabertooth. I'm not sure if this is a big of a green stable as it was when Dockside Extortioners were around. What do you think?
No, kind of lost its edge a bit when Dockside appeared, but I think it's coming back because for some weird reason the whole Gaia's Cradle strategy kind of abuses all this as well. At least I have tried now here in one of my new decks to do other stuff. So returning Bachamel Cup as an example doesn't straight up win you the game, but returning that and playing it again on repeat, get into some loops where you get so much mana suddenly, and it does this with a lot of different creatures.
I will say, with cards like Formidable Speaker coming to the game, now there are those situations where you have haste and you just bounce Formidable Speaker to untap your Gaia's Cradle over and over. And you may even have a Beast Whisperer in play or something like that. So now you're also drawing the cards and you can keep tutoring for creatures, untapping your Gaia's Cradle. And
exactly.
So I think it's, as you said, it has gotten a little bit of a comeback with some of the newer prints.
Yeah, definitely.
I think it definitely have some application.
I think we'll see it more, and I also think that we will see more of the abusing of the blue untapped creatures combination with this. I know at least, just to mention another card that kind of does the same, that Deadeye Navigator, which is more expensive mana-wise, is seeing some sort of comeback as well. So I think Team of Sabertooth will also.
Yeah. There was some of the green stables we wish to talk about in bracket 4 that we see at our table. And if we forgot any, please let us know in the comments. It's green. It's like the same with blue. There's a bunch of cards and of course we didn't talk about all the Beast Whisperers and Guardian projects. I mean, are they green stables? Yes, they are. But I also think you need to play a creature heavy meta in order for them to put them in your decks. And we can't mention all cards, so we'll just talk about some of those that we think have the biggest impact and not as much as the engines that lies behind them. But moving into what cards we don't see that are maybe good enough. I know the first one here is one you made me aware of that I didn't even know. We haven't really seen it at our table. I actually bought a couple of copies of this, which you ended up buying from me because I never put them into decks. And now I'm kind of regretting that because now I'm thinking about putting them back into decks. But
Yeah,
which one is that, Jacob?
Reverend Silence.
Reverend Silence.
Yeah. Yeah, this card seems just, as we said about earlier, if it's free, it's probably pretty decent if it does something. And I think this card really does something, as we talked about earlier in some of our other episodes. Removing Ristic Study is like pretty relevant, and this does it for 0 mana and can even remove multiple ones.
Yeah, and I think it's one of those cards where, as with many other cards, you tend to be greedy when you read them. But
Yeah.
I don't think you need to be greedy in order to run this one, meaning that if you see just one Ristic Study, I mean, don't hold back. Just cast it.
Just do it. Yeah, I even think a Mystic Remora, literally just cast it for 0 mana, it will still be worth it.
Yeah, you're probably right.
Yeah.
I don't think you need to be greedy in that being free, as you said, is really awesome. And then there's all the cases like when playing against your Sir deck or maybe my Shrine deck in Go Shentai, where this card just suddenly gets real good. I think the big question is that do I really want to run Reverend Silence when I'm also myself running both Ristic Study and maybe a Smothering Tithe? And then it's like, I don't want to be running. But you could then say, why are they then running board wipes in the decks where you run creatures?
Yeah.
So it's for those what if situations, and this actually comes with a free mana cost. So I do think it's sort of best in class at what it does. And
yeah, I hope we see it a bit more also because I want to see how powerful it is. I have it in 4 decks, but I haven't really drawn it that much. But I look forward to see it.
Yeah.
Next up, we have a, I guess it's not that new anymore, but a newer card is Ice Till Explorer. And yeah, I'm a bit split on this one.
I was too, but I've actually recently been thinking a bit more about this, and I do straight up just think that it's a very better version of Oracle of Moldiah. And not that we have seen a lot of Oracle of Moldiah at our table. We have seen some, but I don't think we see them much anymore. But what Icel Explorer has going for it is that as soon as you have a fetch land in your graveyard, you will have access to 2 lands every turn. You don't have that necessarily with Oracle of Moldiah.
Yeah.
And just having 1 fetch land in your graveyard, this is sort of only costing 3 mana and not 4. So at the very least, you have a Ramonap Excavator or something like that for the 3 mana. But now you can also play an extra land.
Yeah.
I'm not sure.
Yeah, I'm a bit split as well. I think that if your deck really abuses it, it's very strong, like insane. I think there is a deck out there that tutors for this and maybe even copies it or something like that and really abuses it. But I'm just not sure how good it is just generically. But I think that it's better than we give it credit for, and we should see it more in our pod.
I think it's a tempo thing, to be honest, because if you played it generically, now we're back to some of those cards we've talked about before, where it feels great when you get it down turn 2.
Yeah.
But how does it feel when you're drawing it turn 5 or 6?
Yeah.
And I think that's the big issue, especially if you're not playing any sorts of land-based strategies. But then there's also the other side of the coin, if you want to say that if you are in a Gaia's Cradle meta, this kind of makes sure that if people are removing your Gaia's Cradle somehow and it goes to the graveyard, you can now bring it back. And if you somehow can sacrifice your own Gaia's Cradle, then you can tap it for mana, sacrifice it, goes into the graveyard, you can bring it back up to 2 times with Ice Still Explorer.
I think definitely that could be something, because that's what you do in other decks, just in other ways, like untapping it multiple times. It's kind of the same thing. And I know that in Time, there is a combo where you keep sacrificing Gaia's Cradle, getting it into play again, and just doing that on repeat. So it's definitely something that is done in other decks in other ways. So I think that has potential to be very powerful. Also because Ice still kind of fuels itself with the whole mill thing. So if you can, on top of that, use the mill in general, not only for lands, but maybe being kind of a graveyard deck on top of being a land deck, that could be very powerful. There's a lot of potential. I think we just need to see it in our pod at some point doing the thing.
Yeah. We have Veil of Summer on the list, and many would probably say, but that is a green stable, and I wouldn't disagree necessarily, but we don't see it that much at our table.
We don't.
And that is definitely good enough, especially if you're in non-blue, I think.
It should be, yeah. I think we are in like a meta right now where we all kind of are racing to the end and doing it as fast as possible. And I think the casualties of that is kind of cards like this, where I know it's only 1 mana, but people are still like cutting stuff that doesn't get you to the goal.
We had the whole conversation in the last episodes talking about Redirect Lightning, and I actually think that Veil of Summer is high on that list as well, because not only does it make your things uncounterable, but it also draws your card. Now you have a cantrip on a 1-mana spell. I think that's pretty powerful.
Yeah, also you can just cast it just to cycle it, so it should be played more, I think. But yeah, doesn't really. Maybe it's because it's not that fun of a card as well. Just feel like a filler card sometimes. So.
Yeah, but I also think it's a case of it reading a bit worse than it actually is, meaning that you kind of find it situational. And the whole blue and black thing might throw you off, but that's only for drawing the card. It still makes your spell uncounterable, and that's very powerful.
Next up is a one card that a lot of us have tried. I have at least. It's the Force of Vigor. It reads like it should be good, but I don't know. It feels kind of rough every time I have it in hand. I'm not sure what it is exactly.
Yeah, I think, well, in my case, I think it's kind of obvious, meaning that if you're playing multiple colors, you have a tendency to have more blue and black in your deck than you do green. And that's the issues I've been running into, that I don't have a green card available when I have my Force of Vigor, but I always have a blue card available when I have my Force of Will.
Yeah.
So I think it's the pitching thing that does that we don't necessarily have a good experience when playing it. So I'm not sure if that's the whole situation, but I do think it's part of it.
Yeah, because I know for me at least, decks where then I have a lot of green cards ends up being decks with a lot of creatures. And then suddenly I'm putting in a non-creature that doesn't really help the plan, and then I end up cutting it in those decks. So it is a bit of a fiddly spot. But I think, as we see here, as we said, it should be good enough, or maybe it is good enough. We just need to find a home for it.
We talk about Reverence, Silence, and we talk about spells free in general being very good in bracket 4, or in general for that matter. And Force of Vigor, of course, fits that frame, but at the same time, it just doesn't feel as easy to cast as some of the others.
No. It seems very close, though.
Moving on to our Gaia Cradle meta, we have Sylvan Scrying, and by same extent, we have Sowing Microspawn that you might also be adding. The Sowing Microspawn even have that rare ability of exiling another opponent's lands. So if he's running a Gaia's Cradle, this is one of the few cards that can handle that. But yeah, you're finding your own Gaia's Cradle, and Sowing Microspawn even brings it into play untapped. I love running my Sowing Microspawn in my Helga deck for the same reasons, because guess what I'm finding?
Yeah. And I think that especially Sylvan Scrying, which is a card I have kind of been avoiding, is also increasing value because we get the channel lanes. Suddenly you kind of want them in your hand. People kind of tend to forget that. But yeah, as Gaia's Cradle dominance keep increasing, we will see more of these cards. And I think it'll but be a question of time until we see more of them. And Wizards also seemed to be very in on making more and more insane utility lands. So that will also continue probably.
Yeah, I mean, that's a whole nother conversation, but it seems like Wizards of the Coast by now has just come to the conclusion that bracket 4 and 5, you do what you gotta do, but we're gonna print cards for the rest of the format.
Yeah.
And then we can have the Rule Zero conversation regarding some of the cards, but we're not gonna do that. We're just gonna play them because they're powerful. So in some way, I think I wouldn't even call it a power creep because this is not creeping. This is just pure out of assault, I think.
Yeah.
Of putting so many cards into the meta that just helps you win even more with Gaia's Cradle. To some extent where I can see why that is one of the primary ways of winning games in CEDH by this point.
Yeah, definitely. It's interesting to see what they're doing with it.
The next one on the list is Herd Heirloom. In so many ways, this is probably not bracket 4 when you read it. But I'm also like, if the Soulstone is a card, I do know that green has access to mana in a whole other capacity than black has, but it's still just a 2-mana rock that helps you cast creatures and can even draw your cards. I was thinking about this one in your Bellow deck. You already want to swing with creatures that are 4 power, and now you draw an extra card, and you have a mana rock. I know you cannot cast your enchantments with Herd Heirloom, but you do also have other creatures in that deck.
I do. I actually have it on my card market buy list. Try out at some point. So I am interested in trying it. So I'm kind of on board with it probably being good enough too. We should see it more also because it can just help you. If you have a 3-mana commander, it can help you color fix as well to cast it. You have a tendency when you play green to have a lot of green pips in your land. So also does that. Then later on, you can draw your cards. I think it's interesting, and especially if you play 2 mana or 2 color commanders, you should probably just replace one of your other rocks because you're probably not in issues with the whole mana fixing.
Yeah, the deck I was considering it for right now, for obvious reason, is Coram, and I think it would be a great fit in that deck, and I think I'm gonna try it out.
Yeah, I look forward to see it because I think it has potential.
Another card I think you could be running in Bellow that you probably aren't is Bridgeworks Battle. We have a tendency to use a lot of these utility lands in the other colors like blue and green, but I do think we have. I'm not sure if I'm not sure. Of course, the effect is not as powerful, but I do think that Bridgeworks is somehow underrepresented at our table. Like I said, your Bellow deck is a perfect fit. Your enchantments are already indestructible. You can fight anything. I think these sort of cards are definitely have a home in some decks. And again, in my Coram deck, I think you could be running this and be happy about it.
Yeah, I'll say that just the fact that the backside is like a boat land, so untapped for 3 life, makes it so if you have the space for this kind of lands, just put it in. I will say that my land count is pretty low at this point in most decks, but I will say like Bellow sounds like good fit.
Yeah, it's not for all decks, of course, but yeah, I also think that Coram is one of the few decks I could swing it.
Yeah, I'll probably add it to Bellow. Next up is Haywire Might. It's actually been some time since we have seen this card. We played it a bit at some point. It is pretty powerful. It's 2 mana to exile something that is a non-creature artifact or non-creature enchantment. And it's exile, so it can remove the One Ring, as an example. And it's repeatable in some decks as
well. I ran it in my Muldrotha deck for a while, and I also ran it generically because of the One Ring. Then Oakish Bowmaster got printed, and I was like, maybe not. But now I'm come around to it again and thinking that maybe it's fitting because we've sort of like CDH moved a bit into the Rhystic Study meta.
Yeah.
So now it's not as much of the One Ring anymore as it is Rhystic Study, and having this on the battlefield turn 1 means that it's a deterrent for your opponents not to be casting Rhystic Studies. And now you don't even have to activate it for your opponents not to play Rhystic Study. So it's sort of like a stacks piece. Nobody want to be playing their big value artifacts, enchantments. And you usually don't have anything to do on turn 1 unless you have fast mana or have access to more than 1 mana on turn 1. There's a lot of times where you just play a land past turn. So you can get this out early and it doesn't really cost you anything. And even drawing it mid to late game, I think you would be fine casting this and exiling a Smothering Tide or Rhystic Study or One Ring.
It will definitely just find a target. At this point, artifacts and enchantments is the most dangerous in our part, so it is interesting. I would like to see if it's good enough just to put in generically.
At this point, I actually changed a lot of these out for Nature's Claim. I didn't run both, and maybe you could, but I'm actually beginning to rethink that if Haywire Might is just better. Also because nobody's going to counter this, but somebody might counter your Nature's Claim.
Yeah, I think it's very interesting that it's a lot better turn 1 at least than Nature's Claim. It has some upside, and late game it also does its thing. It doesn't really matter that it's 2 mana instead of 1.
Let's say I'm starting the game and I'm playing this turn 1. People might even pause and not play their Sol Ring now. So you get into these situations where you don't even do anything. You just have this creature in play and nothing else, and now you already kind of have your opponent second guessing if they should play their rain pieces or not. And especially if they have their commander, let's say that you have a commander that you can get out turn 2 or something like that. If you play your Mox Diamond or something like that, and I'm now aware that you can play your commander next turn, so you are aware that I am aware. So now you might not play your Mox Diamond because is he going to exile that because I can cast my commander next turn?
Yeah, definitely. It does do the whole kind of working as a stacks piece, and then the question is if people want to play around it or just don't care and play into it, and if you don't really care either way because you can just punish the person that plays the best piece. So.
Yeah, you get into these mind game territory situations that are kind of fun. Unless we're up against your Sir deck and we know your whole Rhystic Study strategy is an abomination. So now the 2 other opponents know we can just play our our artifacts and enchantment pieces. No way he's gonna use his Haywire Might on those.
True.
But yeah, I'm actually coming a bit round to this, and I think I'm gonna try it in some decks again.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see what it does. I think it could have a lot of value. So next up we have Dozen of the Falling Leaves / City of Solitude. So kind of the same effect. They are so close, I think.
I also think you need to be non-white to be
Yeah.
considering these.
Definitely. Yeah, I think they're good cards. It's just hard to justify them because if it doesn't work out, you play them and don't win the game, it can help your opponents a lot. So very dangerous. If you're playing mono green, it's probably the best answer you have.
Yeah, I was considering Dozen in Corum again because I'm in non-blue and I have so many creature tutors and reanimation, and it can help me in those situations where I might think I have the game if nobody interrupts me, and getting this into play can make sure of that. I considered it for Muldrotha for some while, having creature tutors, or maybe you have self-milled it and you can get it out with Muldrotha before trying to go for the win. So I do think it has some application where maybe even Sultai colors is the perfect colors to be playing to considering this, but I do think they still have a place. I would play Dozen before City of Solitude because there are so many creature tutors in green.
Yeah, definitely. They can catch people by surprise by tutoring into play. So I think he's definitely the best answer there.
The next one on the list, Frenzied Baloth, and I've sort of been thinking about putting it into more decks. I like the whole thing that your commander cannot be countered.
Yeah.
It sort of provides some of the same utility that you get from your Delighted Halfling, making sure that your commander cannot be countered. And then there's the whole One Ring thing that we have seen on several occasions being very important to the game, and people cannot take damage and stuff like that. So just having this effect on a creature is very useful, I think. Once again, I'm considering this for my Corum deck. Actually, I have it right here because I was considering for that deck. And now Hexing Squelcher got printed. So now I'm like, am I going to run both? And probably not.
I think it's pretty interesting, the card at least. Also, as you said, the One Ring we have talked about many times. But also, on top of that, life is still relevant in some of our games. And it's 3/2 Trample Haste, turn 2. That will actually put a dent in people's life. So if people have a Sylvan Library early or something like that, you can start hitting them down. It does that as well pretty well.
Yeah, and it's all your creatures. It's not only your commander. So now you might cast Drannith Magistrate, Collector Oath, or whatever you have. It can even be some other value creatures like Orcish Bowmaster, and they can just not counter it.
Yeah.
So, a card I've been considering more and more. I do think it being able to protect your commander is good enough to be putting in the deck, but it's also one of those cards that we've talked about in other situations where how does it feel casting this on turn 5? And I think you do want to be running a creature strategy in general, like in Corum, before being really satisfied with running this.
Yeah, definitely. At least your commander then should be very important for the plane, or very mana intensive, like Italia or Sakama, something like that. Also pretty strong there. But it is interesting, and people need to kind of remember it exists. It can kind of get lost in all the new cards getting printed constantly currently.
But there were some of the cards that we don't see, or see very little at least, at our table that are maybe good enough to be playing. And there's definitely some cards on this list that I will be trying out very soon to see if they can pull their weight.
Yeah, definitely. Next up, we have cards we actually play, but we might say that are not good enough. First up is an interesting one because we have been back and forth with this, both of us. It's Druid of Purification. For me, it has like a renaissance right now. Again, we have talked about this card so much, but because, yes, of Gaia's Cradle, and you make 1 billion mana, and hey, why not use it on a 4 mana thing that destroys other things?
But I do actually think it only kind of works in those decks.
Yeah.
It's definitely not a generic card anymore in my case.
No.
I even took it out of Helga, which want to be casting 4 CMC creatures and above. And I think that's a testament to what I think about the card. But yeah, if you're in a deck that provides loads of mana, maybe. But usually when you have that sort of mana, are there not creatures you'd rather be casting, is my question. Because what is this replacing?
Probably. Probably. It feels good to cast it, but yeah, there's probably better things to do.
And I've had those games where it's my whole turn. You have 4 mana, you're casting this and say pass turn. But in most cases, I have at least helped one other opponent by doing this, if not 2.
Yeah.
And do I really want to be using my whole turn and 4 mana to do so?
Probably not. It's one of those cards, if mass removal is not good enough, this is definitely not good enough.
Yeah, especially not for 4 mana.
Yeah.
Next up is probably a green stable. But I've reached the conclusion that if you're not playing a strategy that is revolved around maybe recasting this over and over again and doing some sort of locks, it's probably not good enough. And that's Eternal Witness. I think 3 mana for this effect is too slow at our game. If it's just to getting a card back, it's probably best in class considering it's any card and it is to your hand. I'm not denying that. But in many cases, we're drawing so many cards that Noxious Revival will probably just be the better card of the 2. And there are also actually instant speed spells that cost 2 CMC that gets you a permanent or instant sorcery back to hand. We also talked about the Chakra Meditation in blue. And yes, I know that's instant sorceries only. But in bracket 4, you either have Tutors or Fierce Guardianships or Jessica's Wills in your graveyard and will do most of the same thing that Eternal Witness does, but now you can also just draw and discard with Chakra Meditation. So I think for generic use, I think Eternal Witness have seen its days now, to be honest. But what are your thoughts on it?
Yeah, probably. As you maybe have gathered from this video, I'm on a creature stand right now. A lot of my decks do creature stuff, and I've just found myself putting this into more and more decks. And I think it's just more that likely the effect I want. I want to play my best card multiple times, and paying 3 mana to play my best card again is good enough. So, but regrowth and all this does the same.
But you're also then playing it for a reason, like we said, and not just generically. There's
exactly.
some thoughts behind putting it into the deck.
Exactly. And I'm just tired of mentioning Guy's Cradle, so.
but that is the conclusion.
I can say this time it's because I play Crater Hoof and it does 1 more damage now.
Yeah.
Yeah. Next up we have a card I think everyone was pretty high on, and that is 6. And I think we might have reached the same conclusion here that this card is probably just too slow. It reads very well. Practically it doesn't do that much.
I think I'm the person in the pod that has resolved 6 the most time, playing it very heavily in my Muldrotha deck. And last year, I think I played it 179 times, my Muldrotha deck. And I've resolved quite a few of these 6. And there's definitely been occasions where it did what it was supposed to do. But at least as many situations, it hasn't really done anything or withered in my hand or... The sealing, you don't get the sealing often enough, because when you put it into your deck, you're in these situations where, if I just have Life from the Loam and Lotus Petal in hand, now I can get lands back from the graveyard and discard them and get my Lotus Petal back over and over again. And now I can just, for free, using no mana, get as many mana as I have lands in my hand. And I think I've done that once, ever. So... It's like, if it's not your main strategy to utilize 6, I don't think it does enough.
Yeah, it also has this weird thing that you kind of want to be a land deck to abuse it, but most land decks right now have a tendency to just put the lands directly into play, but you kind of want them in your hand, so it has this weird spot right now. Definitely, if you can abuse it, it's very strong, but it's not as generic as we maybe have hoped for. Next up is a card I have put on the list. I'll put it over here. You actually started by putting it in the stable list, and that is the Great Henge.
Yeah. What a maniac.
Yeah. I think that it's just too slow currently. I said when we talked about it earlier that I think Beast Whisper is better, and in fear of repeating myself, it's a creature, so I get all the benefits I talked about before. And Great Henge doesn't do that. And at least in my decks, for most of the time, I will only have around probably max 4, a 4-power creature. And I think that's not strong enough currently, even though it should be, because that should be better than Beast Whisperer, but then it's not a creature, so it doesn't really mesh with the rest of your deck. Yeah, I haven't been that happy about it, at least, even though I probably should be.
Yeah, we haven't talked about Guardian Project and Beast Whisperer and cards like that, even though
Yeah.
the decks that wants all of them in most situations. You're playing creature decks and you want to be drawing cards. In my opinion, the Great Henge is just best in class, even if you're playing a Guy's Cradle, because now you're also tapping for mana and gaining 2 life every time. And my whole spiel is that even if you pay 5 mana for this, and not only the 2 green, you're still tapping for 2 when you play it, so it sort of only costs 3 now, and that's a better rate than both Beast Whisperer and Guardian Project. And I think it's a big deal that it keeps tapping for 2 mana on every turn. That's 1 more than you're getting from your Beast Whisperer when you tap Guy's Cradle.
Yeah.
Next on the list, maybe also a bit controversial, because we said in the intro that one of the things that green don't have too much of is board protection, but here we are. Heroic Intervention is a card that we play that are maybe not good enough. And my explanation for this is that you usually don't have a need to protect your whole board state in our meta.
Pretty much. And I feel like if you hold 2 mana up, it's also kind of rough.
Yeah. And you don't really do that in green.
No.
Hold up 2 mana, you usually want to be spending your mana. And then we're back to, are you really protecting your creatures now? Because the most board wipe in our meta is Toxic Deluge. So, and maybe the next on the list is an overloaded Cyclonic Rift. So I'm not sure how much Heroic Intervention end up doing. And for that reason, I have Heroic Intervention on my list, at least.
Yeah, I totally agree. I have sung this song a long time because I just have a bad experience with it. And I think the biggest one for me is what you also said, that in green you want to use that mana to get even more board presence to snowball even faster. So kind of have to, pray a bit that you don't get board wiped.
And it's also, you have it in hand. And are you now going to keep 2 mana open for the rest of the game if you need this?
Yeah, I'm definitely not, at least. So
next on the list, Jacob, a fairly new card.
Yeah, it is the Cabbage Merchant, and maybe it's a bit early, but we have seen some of this, and we also talked a lot about it. And I'm a bit split if it's good enough. I think it's one of those cards that in the right deck, it's of course good enough. If you're like a Thrasher's deck that just can use all the mana in the world, it will probably be pretty strong. But pure generic insert into any green deck, not sure it's quite there.
Well, I'm a little more sure about this not being good enough than you are, because one of the decks we have seen at our table is actually that Thrasher's deck, and it hasn't really done any work, because I also think that if you put this into decks that really can use it, that your opponents are aware of this, like, hey, if he keeps that Cabbage Merchant in play much longer, it's going to be an issue.
Yeah.
And Thrasher's is not a great blocker, so now people hit you in the face just to remove your food tokens. And is that really the situation you want to be putting yourself in? Just maybe to get 1 or 2 mana extra? Because people just blindly casting spells into this and ignoring you is not what's going to happen in Bracket 4, in my opinion.
No, and it has this weird effect as well that it's not really that good in a food deck, because suddenly if you make a lot of food in other ways, people have even more reason to hit you, and now you lose even more food. So your food is kind of less safe because you play this card, and you probably won't play it. So I feel like if you play it, you're not really a food deck, and if you're not a food deck, it doesn't really make enough mana. It is interesting. I'll keep my judgment. Maybe us thinking it's not good enough will make it good enough because we don't hit the person that have it.
My gut feeling is that if it was good enough, we would have seen so at least in one game by now.
Yeah.
And we have seen on the table multiple times, and it has not been good enough yet. And that's usually an indicator of it not being good enough. And I also think that the one game we have a play date tomorrow, and the one game we will see it doing its thing is probably going to be a game where he was already winning, would my guess be. And is it then the reason that he's winning, or is it just a win more card?
Yeah, definitely.
That was some of the cards that we are playing at our table that we are considering is not good enough anymore. And I can say, for my sake at least, I've taken out several of these cards from my decks and put in other cards.
Yeah.
But let's move on to our favorite category, the pet cards. I'm not even sure it's our favorite category. I just like saying that.
Yeah.
First one is actually a card we have talked a little bit about before in card of the episode. So we won't go too much into depth here, but that is Malevolent Rumble. And I just think that in the decks that are rhyming with this just a little bit, that this is worth running. It usually ends up only costing 1 mana, and you get a creature. And like we talked about before with the Gaia's Cradle meta, this is also generating 1 mana, so now it might even be free in some cases. So
yeah,
I just like this card.
Yeah, card selection is always pretty decent, and having it in green if you're not blue maybe also be the thing that makes it even better. So check it out, see if you like it. Yeah, next up I will have, these are probably one of my biggest pet cards. I play in a lot of decks even though I know I probably shouldn't. And the big one is Temp with Discovery, but I also like put Pierce Whim into the same category. Both of those cards find I'm so original, Gaia's Cradle. But they also do other things. I think Temp with Discovery is probably not good enough anymore because everyone knows what I'm doing at this point. But I just enjoy the whole mind game, and it still finds an untapped Gaia's Cradle, and sometimes someone missteps and I get 4 lands into play and it goes totally crazy, and that's always fun.
It has been a while since you've been allowed that.
Yeah, definitely. It probably won't happen again. But I think the floor is still fine. Finding an untapped Gaia's Cradle is still good. And I think Pierce Whim is actually very close to being good enough. It has 4 mana for removing 3 creatures and finding Gaia's Cradle or whatever utilitarian you want is a pretty good rate. It's just a hard way it does it. It's not really the best way your opponent gets to choose, and in some way they can play around it. So
I think in this Gaia's Cradle meta that you can get away with playing these expensive effects because 4 mana isn't really anything if you find a Gaia's Cradle that taps for 6 or 7 or whatever.
Yeah.
So, but I actually like Pierce Whim a lot better than Temp with Discovery. The last 3 times you've cast Temp with Discoveries, I'm pretty sure that nobody chose that effect. But that's the question. Do they need to in order for this card to be good? Because you're finding Gaia's Cradle. So probably not.
Probably not, yeah.
And now it's just gravy if someone does.
Yeah. And it's one of the few cards where I feel like we're a bit back to casual. Can have fun conversations.
I just quickly want to mention Tameo Safekeeping as a pet card. It might also be somehow a green stable. I'm not sure. You could also mention Legolas Reflex here. It doesn't really do the same thing, and this one also gives it indestructible, which I think is relevant. It also gives you 2 life, which in many cases can be relevant. I just wanted to mention this card because we were talking about Heroic Intervention not being good anymore, but this is only costing 1 mana, which is, I know it doesn't sound like much, but it's much easier to keep up 1 mana than 2. And you usually don't need to protect one piece, whether that being a Food Chain or Gaia's Cradle or whatever you have, and this just being able to protect any sort of permanent and not only creatures makes it so much more relevant, I think.
Yeah, I think it's a pretty good card that if your deck has space for it, probably think about it.
Yeah, there are, I think there are 2 or 3, maybe even 4 versions of this protecting a permanent. So Tameo Safekeeping is just one of them.
I think it's a good card. I played in some decks as well, so I like it. Next up, I have a card that is Generous Patron, and I think this could be the answer because I know in higher brackets, the way you abuse Gaia's Cradle and playing Cloud of Fairies and sometimes cloning stuff, it creates so much mana that sometimes you don't really know what to do with all the mana. And this could be an outlet in some way. If you have this card, you can play it and keep and start cloning that. So if you don't want to be a Thrashers deck, I think this could be like a solution to drawing more cards. And also just generically, it's not the worst rate that you play a creature and draw 2 cards. The floor is pretty strong, and then it can be abused heavily if you want to go that route. I really want to use this card in some deck at some point. I'm just not sure I have found a home yet.
Yeah, and we talked earlier about Temur Sabertooth. I mean, with this card, you have infinite card draw as well if you have infinite mana. So last on our list is an oldie but goodie, for me at least, and that's Nostalgic Dreams. I actually think I'm the only one playing this card. I'm not sure.
I think so.
But talking about Eternal Witness, I actually think that Nostalgic Dreams does a lot more. And it exiling itself when you cast it, I think, is a testament to that. Having cards in hand that doesn't do anything, and it's 2 mana, and sometimes it's drawing 4 cards maybe. I've used it in both Muldroth and other graveyard decks to great extent. I'm running it in Corum also. I think it's a great card. Using this in my Corum deck and just getting like Incarnation Technique and a Reanimate back in hand is something I really want to be doing. And like we talked about with Eternal Witness, and one of its strengths being that it could get any card back. Nostalgic Dreams is the same. So, and I think it's a much better version if you want to be doing Eternal Witness stuff.
Yeah, I think it's a very interesting card. I think for me at least, and probably also for a lot of other people, a bit scary that this card is an additional cost, and that's probably what keeps people away. That you can really get ruined by this card. But when you have casted and it has gone through, it's just been so powerful. And for the most people are not gonna counter it unless you're literally just winning with it. So
yeah, was just about to say that in our bracket, I think we are getting better and better than not just countering things and keeping those back until people are trying to win. So unless I have cards in my graveyard where my opponents can see if I get those in hand, I'm gonna win the game. They're probably not gonna be counting it. And also, I probably have Hexing Squelcher in play anyway, and people can counter it. Or maybe I have Veil of Summer in hand. Who knows? But yeah, I think I've have this counted one time, but that was when I had extra turn spells in my graveyard, and those could be dangerous. So, but I really like this card, and I think regarding getting cards back from the graveyard, that this is best in class. Also in a meta where we draw so many cards, so pitching 4, 5, 6 cards. I actually think I've done that more than once. Gotten 4+ cards back in hand.
yeah.
That was what we had on green, and like we said in the beginning, this is green. So but it's really true for all the colors. We can't talk about all the cards. We have already deleted so many cards from this episode that we're not talking about.
Yeah.
So it's not that we're forgetting. We're probably also forgetting some, but but some of the cards not mentioning in this episode is some cards that we just scratched from the list in order for making this episode under 2 hours.
Yeah, I think green is definitely the worst one. There is just so many good cards that are considerable. So
yeah, but please share all of your favorite green cards with us in the comments. Also, as always, we are more than happy to see you on our Discord server, sharing cards and deck ideas, and maybe even getting a little bit of help with your most recent deck list. But until next time, thank you for tuning in.
thank you for watching, everyone. Have a good one.